Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us here at the Mechanics Institute. I'm Laura Shepard, Director of Events, and we're very pleased to welcome you to our program tonight with artist George McCalman and poet Tonya Foster. And tonight we're going to be celebrating George's new book, Illustrated Black History. Before we begin, we'd like to know how many of you are new to the Mechanics Institute? Who's never been here before? Wonderful. Well, welcome again. We were founded in 1854, and we are one of San Francisco's most vital literary and cultural centers here in the heart of the city. We feature our general interest library, which is on the second and third floors, an international chess club right down the hall, and we have our ongoing literary programs almost every day of the week, and our Cinema Lit film series going on as well every Friday. Also, the chess club has tournaments and classes that are going on both live and online. So please check out our website at milibrary.org. Also, I'd like to remind you that we also have tours Wednesday at noon. So if you have friends, family that would like to take a tour, send them on down Wednesday at noon. And also, as mentioned, Alyssa will be giving a tour after our program. Become a member, and then you can enjoy everything we have to offer under one roof. And you can take a brochure, which is right at the front. If you have any questions about membership, see Alyssa, see Andy, see me afterwards. Also, after our talk, we will be selling books, and George and Tonya will be here to sign your books. We are very pleased to co-sponsor this program with MOAD, the Museum of African Diaspora, and also just a quick mention about their upcoming event. It's a book launch and celebration for the Black Yearbook with Adrienne Buriel in conversation with George McCalman, and that's on Wednesday, February 28th at 6 o'clock p.m., so please check that out. And now I'd like to introduce our esteemed guests. George McCalman is an artist and creative director based in San Francisco. His design studio, McCalman Co., collaborates with a wide range of cultural clients. He is a columnist for the San Francisco Chronicle, and his observed and first-person column document Bay Area culture. His book, Illustrated Black History, is his first publication. It is a gorgeous collection of over 300 portraits in a variety of styles, featuring the famous and also the yet-to-be-known who have contributed to activism, science, politics, culture, literature, fashion, food, medicine, business, and more, plus informative biographies and inspiring quotes from each of those featured. Now, you may know Maya Angelou and, of course, James Baldwin, but do you know anything about Leah Chase, restaurateur of Dookie Chase in New Orleans? Perhaps not. Or Althea Gibson, tennis pro, or Charles White, painter, soon to be revealed. And our other honored guest tonight, Tonya Foster, is author of A Swarm of Bees in High Court, La Grammaire des Eaux, and the forthcoming Thingifications. She is the co-editor of Third Mind, Teaching Creative Writing Through Visual Arts, and the forthcoming Umbra Galaxy, published by Wesleyan University Press. She is recipient of awards and fellowships from the Foundation for Contemporary Arts, the C.D. Wright Award, SF MoMA, Headland Center for the Arts, Radcliffe Institute, Creative Capital Foundation, the Mellon and Ford Foundations, and others. Dr. Foster holds the George and Judy Marcus Endowed Chair in Poetry at San Francisco State University. And, of course, she's got a lot of ongoing projects, which I hope she'll share with us. So please welcome George McCalman and Tonya Foster.
This thing.
In this thing.
This thing. I want to say every event I've had in support of this book, I always address anybody, whether it's 2 people in the audience or 200, and thank you for just being here. There's lots of other things you could be doing with your time, and so I'm very appreciative and grateful for your attendance this evening. Thank you very much.
And I'm going to provide commentary on what you just did. That somehow that graciousness is actually the first thing I noticed about me when I met you as a person new to the Bay Area. And I think this is relevant.
We've known each other for a few years, so there's a lot of familiarity you'll feel in our exchange. We're not strangers.
We're not strangers, but I so appreciated just how, and I still appreciate, of course, how gracious and welcoming you were to me. And I am, if you know me any place other than sitting in front of you, oh yes, sitting in front of you, I am socially awkward. And I no longer hide from you. And so for the longest time, whenever I would meet George, I would say, I'm Tonya Foster. And he's like, you tell me this every time I see you. But
I would say, I know who you are.
But I would say this precisely because there's an incredible kind of graciousness that I can't say I'm the only recipient of. Right? That it's all the people you know, people you encounter. And for myself, I know I can't remember everybody. So that dynamic was about how I see you, how I saw you, and I start there because that's also the kind of engagement that the book undertakes. Right? It's a kind of a real welcoming and acknowledgement of people in all kinds of different fields. And so one of the things I began to think about recently, I've been talking with students and other writers about a poem as being a part of a constellation, right? Or a book of poetry, a book of anything, as being one node or one moment in a constellation of ideas, a community of people that the artist is in conversation with. And so when one of the really kind of beautiful things in the acknowledgement page is that you set those terms for how the book opens. And can you speak to that, speak to the sense of history as both personal, but also as far beyond the personal that this particular work engages?
What Tonya is very sweetly stating is that in the acknowledgements page, I thank myself first. And I thanked myself for my curiosity because that is the origin point of anything that we do as human beings. We can thank God, we can thank our families, we can thank our mothers, our spouses, our children. But the truth is we are with ourselves. And before we are even connected to God, we have ownership over how we move out into the world and how we engage with everyday people. And this book took 6 years of my time, but it also feels like it was a whole lifetime of work because one of the unique things about this book, which is important to state only because people don't think about how books are made, because we are the beneficiaries of it, and books are our gift to each other and the world. It's how we share information, it's how we travel into different realms, different universes, different worlds. And I am the co-writer, artist, and designer of the book. And that's a rare thing. And even the publisher that I worked with, I said, has any other author done all of the things in one book that I do? And even the publisher of HarperCollins said, no, you are a pioneer to us. And, and what Tonya's speaking to is that I had to be graceful with myself first, all throughout the process of making this. And I had to be graceful with every person that I collaborated with. I had to be graceful with every pioneer I got to know. I had to be graceful with myself as a Black person, doing something that a lot of Black people don't get to do. I had to think about all of the ways that I was moving through the world very clearly with agency. There was no point that I second-guessed my place in doing this. And I had to kind of come back to myself many times, and I had to rely on a lot of people around me for counseling and guidance, because book publishing makes you feel crazy all the time. And so I had to just really find my center over and over again.
I mean, yes, you start with yourself, but what's also kind of miraculous in terms of what you do, and what's also kind of miraculous in terms of what you do, is that you redefine the self again and again and again in series of relationships, right? And so you thank people who've added to the self that you are, right? And that, to my mind, is creating this kind of expansive vision of authorship that is not the author isolated.
Yes. What we both know is that being an artist is a lonely existence. You are working with yourself. And at the end of the day, you can show stuff to your parents and your friends and your thises and your that's. But the truth is, it really is just your relationship with yourself. You're the origin point, you're the person producing the work. At the end of the day, you're the person that has to know when it's finished, when it's not finished. And writing is also, it's a very lonely existence. There's no one else who can prompt words out of you. If you're a writer, it's a commitment of sitting down, sitting with yourself, and navigating how you are extracting the universe inside of yourself out. And you're giving birth every single time you sit down to write words. And so, in combining all of these traits into one book, it was a lonely experience, and also it was not. There were a lot of people around me who were North Stars, and every single person who I think played a really pivotal role in me kind of understanding my responsibility, and I viewed making this book as a responsibility. No one asked me to make this, but I knew it was essential to create this book that did not exist before.
And to what or to whom is the sense of responsibility?
So I'm going to be really honest with you, because there are two ways of answering the question. Both of them are true. To the external world, I felt a sense of responsibility to my community, because one of the wild things about this book is that no version of it existed before I made it. And that's why I did it. I made something that there was an absence of. There was a vacuum of it. A book that is a compendium of our American icons and the origin point of so much of our culture that we take for granted, that most people don't know about. That book didn't exist. Yeah, you could go to the encyclopedia to find these names, and if you're smart, you know how to search online to find them. But to have it all in one book outside of an academic book or a children's book, that there was absolutely nothing. And I just became enraged with that. I just got really angry, and then I decided to do something about it. But the truth is that the person I felt most a sense of responsibility to was myself. I did not want to fail myself. And the promise and potential that I had, my origin is I come from publishing. So I have an unfair advantage over most people in that I know how to design books in my sleep. I know this process very easily. This was not an uphill battle for me. I spent 15 years as a magazine art director. I worked in New York with the biggest names in the industry at a time where I was one of 5 Black people in the entire industry. And so I have established some experience that makes this easy for me, where it would be daunting and intimidating for someone else. There were a lot of hurdles in the book, in making this book, but the making of it part was the easiest part. It was all of the invisible things of making sure I didn't mess up, telling people stories that are in the public domain, telling stories about people who are still alive and very private, that I was speaking intimately about people's lives, and I did not want to mess that up. I did not want to add any more burden to anyone's life. I only wanted to celebrate people's lives. But it's always very subjective. And so I was making something that I didn't know what the response was going to be. I thought a lot of people would hate that I was doing this, and not for reasons that other people might think. Our culture is in a really strange cul-de-sac right now, where you're critiqued for not trying, and then you're critiqued for trying. And so I knew that I was basically setting a target on myself, that if I got it wrong, my community would tell me. And I decided to wear that and just use it as fuel. But I didn't want to disappoint my own standards. I didn't want to do anything subpar. I only wanted to do the best version of this for my community and myself.
So the answer to who is not just yourself, but it's also the community that surrounds the self. And I think that, I ask this question because the acknowledgement, well, it's interesting that you said, well, I start by thanking myself, but that's not where you end, right? And so that it's this beautiful acknowledgement in that I'm grateful to my father for making me who I am. I am devoted to my grandmother, Lyris Holder, who taught me everything that is good in me and made me the storyteller I am. And it goes on in this way, so that even though you say, I thank myself, you list all of these people who are involved in making you, you. And so in that way, and I'm not contradicting you or anything, but I think, yes, writing is a lonely task, and yet art doesn't happen without community, right? And it's a community of the dead, and a community of the yet to be, and it's a community of people who surround us in ways that make us feel alive. And that what's remarkable for me in looking at this work is the ways that you don't lose sight of those relationships. And so the performance of the writer as the hero, the sort of radically individualized hero, that's not what this work is about.
And it's also nonsense. It's also not true.
What's not true?
The writer as
The hero?
yeah. You know, this is one of the things that Tonya and I talk about is, pardon my French, the bullshit of the American narrative.
Yeah.
And one of the things that it does is it challenges your sense of community all the time. And it plays with your head, and it fucks a lot of people up. It really, really does. And I watch it all the time. You know, when you have fidelity to your family, you're seen as a weirdo. And when you have fidelity, when you have commitment, when you express commitment, that it's somehow portrayed as weakness. And that when you are, the idea that you're taken to the open road and you're just driving to end up nowhere, that is seen as heroic. When they hold this whole, yeah, you gotta shoot up some stuff, and there's always violence, because, you know, that's always the story. But the idea that you are deeply inside a community and that you rely on people and you need people, because that's what we as human beings do. That's actually what we're put on earth to do, is to be in service to each other. And then you have to kind of go off and create your own and be self-made, this total nonsense word, phrase. And then what? And then nothing. That's the end of the story. And that's like the scene at the end of the movie. But that has nothing to do with everyday life, because we, as we've seen in the pandemic, when people are isolated, it's no bueno. It is no bueno. It's a sad tale when we are isolated as human beings. It's the worst. It's the thing that teenagers know. It's the thing that young adults know. It's the thing our senior citizens know. And people die in isolation, and they live and thrive in community. And so I come from a community-based family, so it's the only way I know how to be. And so that's why I brought that into everything that I do.
And that's a radical definition of the self, right? And it's, a close friend once said of her partner, Lisa and Greg have been together longer than many married couples I know. And Lisa said, being with Greg, the joy is twice as good, the grief is half as bad. And so I think about that way that we might become each other's grief dispersal units, and joy enhancement units. And that there's something about this. I also love the subtitle, honoring the iconic and the unseen. And I guess I'd like to ask you to talk a little bit about that and why it's important to talk about both the iconic and the unseen. And also, what is it to make that visible?
So the subtitle of the book, as Tonya said, is honoring the iconic and the unseen. But the book is really more about the unseen than the iconic. And I start the book out by saying and showing what it's not about. You know, I wanted everyone to know that this was not fantasy football. So it wasn't going to be like your top favorite Black pioneers. And I didn't really care what anyone thought. That was one of the best things I did, was just tuning out the world. It took me a while, it took me a couple of years to inhabit that, to feel comfortable with that. I felt like that was blasphemous in a lot of ways, that I was basically not going to have Martin Luther King, I was not going to have Harriet Tubman in the book, I was not going to have a lot of the pioneers that during this month everyone sees. It's like the top 10, top 10 hits. I wanted to dig a lot deeper than that. I wanted to educate myself and re-educate myself, because I thought, you know, I've been in publishing for a long time. I'm a reporter, I'm a writer, I'm always educating myself. and I have a naturally curious streak. I don't need anyone prompting me to do research on the thing that I'm interested in. I take my own initiative. I've done that my whole life. And I knew that if I just did the unseen, that would be a turnoff to some people. So what I did at the beginning, in introduction, was a subversive thing. I created several portraits of people who were not in the book, just to say, I understand you're gonna come to the book expecting these people, so let me show you. Let me just scratch that off the list and tell you that there are a lot more people that you should know. It's not just about Martin Luther King, it's not just about Malcolm X, it's not just about Marcus Garvey, it's not just about Harriet Tubman, it's not just about, there's a vast ocean, and it's the iceberg. The most interesting part is under the water, and that's what I wanted to show. And so, even though the book is, and we had to have a workshop that subtitle, and it was going to be celebrating the unseen and iconic, and it went through many revisions, and then we ended up honoring, had the best, it just sounded great, it landed on everyone's tongue, and it just felt delicious. But the book is, I always tell people, it is more about the unseen than the iconic, and that is by design, and that is what this book is actually all about.
And that then gives the other, if you think of work as a kind of constellation, it's another particular constellation in the night sky.
Yes, yes. And that even the folks who are iconic, this is the other piece of the book, even the folks who are iconic, I was telling different stories about them. I did not want to tell the same chestnuts that you can go on Wikipedia to find. I wanted to get to, at its core, I wanted to understand who these people were and are. I wanted to really understand who they as human beings are. Not the totems, not the symbols. We tend to deify or demonize our icons. And I wanted to move both of those away. I didn't want to lionize anyone. I wanted them to be human. I wanted them to be flawed, interesting, contrarian, irritating. I wanted them to be human because one of the things that we do in the United States is we lionize or demonize the Black community. And we don't deserve either.
And both of those are a way of killing off.
It is a way.
That
and
the icon
icon.
is no longer a threat.
And they're also no longer human. They're up there.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of Americans feel like that's what we need, that's what we need to have. And I always rejected that. It's the humanity, it's what we get to be as irritating as everyone else. And that it's just not, it's not about, looking so amazing or being so amazing that you become something else. It is about what makes us all human beings.
And that varies. I mean, also one of the things that's kind of, for me, interesting as a writer about the first line of the acknowledgments and then how the text moves is that it's a very particular point of view.
Yes.
Right?
And I also knew it would be controversial to say that. And by the time I finished this book, I felt like I had earned my perspective. And the book is written in the first person, so it's written from my perspective the entire time. And so it's, making sure it wasn't just in the third person, that it wasn't just encyclopedic, that it wasn't just Wikipedia. That I was telling stories, and I was telling intimate stories that was bringing anyone reading the book closer to the person that they were reading about, the subject, the pioneer, and closer to me too. That I was saying, yeah, I'll handle your disdain if you don't like what I'm writing. I'm fine. You don't have to like me, but you should pay attention to what this is, who this person is, what they contributed, because there's a lot of information in here. There are a lot of everyday things that people don't know Black people created, invented, personified, brought to life. There's a whole slew of that. And I really wanted to make sure that people felt that it wasn't over there. I wanted people to understand it's right here.
What I also love about history in the first person is there is an acknowledgement that the subject position is as invented as the perspective of the object, right?
So beautifully stated. Because we read history and we think it's objective, because they are facts. But let me tell you, it's just as biased as anything you would write in the first person. And this is one of the fallacies that we don't teach children. The idea that somehow if you're reading something in the third person, it's truer than writing something. It's all subjective. All of history is subjective, even when it's grounded in facts. Because there's a lot that history leaves out, and it is the eye of the beholder. There's a lot throughout, and I had to relearn this in researching this book. You know, one of the things I'm fascinated by culturally, and this is not to inflame the crowd, but it's more about country music. And I was reading a story today about this new Beyonce album that's coming out, that's country, and there's a whole, like, is she country, is she? Yeah, and listen, and I read, it was an essay in Time magazine, and it's written so simply and beautifully, you know, that country music, that we assign a lot of these things to a particular group. And country music is basically three things. It is Mexican culture, it is Black culture, and it's indigenous culture. And that's it. No, there's no other thing that it is. If we're talking about a thing, we're talking about where it's from. End of story. And so you can like or not like that, but it doesn't matter whether you like it or not, because it's the truth. And so everyone, it doesn't stop anyone from loving country music or going to the square dance, or country is a really popular music genre, and it is ascendant. It is becoming a dominant music force again after being quiet for a couple decades. It's big business. And Beyonce reclaiming the fact that she is from Texas. She grew up with that culture. Of course it's hers to me. It doesn't matter what you think about what she's doing. It's hers. It's her culture. And this idea that somehow Black people are asking to participate in something that we helped create is insanity personified. And it is one of the many things that we as Black people have to constantly deal with, this second guessing of us claiming aspects of our culture and reclaiming aspects of our culture. And that's always a fight. You know, there's always some response to that negatively. And it's like, shut up. What are you all talking? What are you complaining about? You know, everyone gets to benefit from this. Everyone gets to participate in it. And even the conversation about cultural appropriation is reductive. What it does not acknowledge is that for the longest time, for hundreds of years, the origin points of our culture were moved to the side. And now, the originators are reclaiming the stories. That's all that's happening. And no one needs to be pressed about that. But a lot of people are pressed about it. And so that's the fight.
It's a fight for ownership.
Yes.
Right?
And invisible Not even tangible, it's the invisible parts that just kind of go away.
Which parts?
When someone else claims your stuff, you have to fight with them to get it back.
And yes, and so what if we relate? Okay, that's a whole other conversation. I'm not gonna go down that. What I am going to ask is, how did you determine the styles of the drawings? If you look at the drawings, and the style for each selection, each person you focus on?
Well, actually, even that is a continuation of what we were just talking about, because I was doing a few things that I knew were unconventional. This whole book is just unconventional. I made a lot of decisions that my editor and my publisher were not thrilled with. I fought with my publisher the entire time.
It speaks to it that the book still came out and it's beautiful and
I was relentless. They did not know what to do with me.
well, but it says something that they didn't just say go your own way.
Well, I almost went my own way, and they came back and said,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
because that's how resolute I was and relentless. I was not going to compromise it for anyone.
Right.
And, you know, I made a lot of visual choices early in making the book. You know, the convention of a book like this is you establish a style and you render everyone through the same prism. That's how books are done. That's how museums present shows. I'm saying something really, really important to this group. Museums, galleries, universities, they all suffer from the same problem. And it's this need to compress everything and flatten information. Everyone has to get and look and be the same. That is fundamentally untrue to who we are as human beings. And so I decided, not as a response, but because I was proactively thinking about the pioneers, I wanted to make sure that they were individualized, that they were not rendered through the same style. I also wanted to make each person unique, because I was saying that each of their stories is unique and they all deserve different treatment. I didn't know that I was going to approach it that way initially, and then I did the first couple of, well, the original project is what prompted that. I did the original project. I did a daily painting 8 years ago this month. And I shared it on Instagram. It was just like doing research. It was just what I thought was just a self-motivated project. And as I kept doing it, the first one I did was Gordon Parks, and then for Edna Lewis, who's a culinary icon. And then I did Gordon Parks, who is a polymath, photographer, filmmaker, one of the kind of origin points of a lot of the filmmaking we see today. Gordon Parks was the originator. And I rendered each of them using the same tools differently. And so when I was starting on this book, I did a couple of portraits, and they each were distinctly different. And I realized that I was going to approach this entire book that way. And I remember saying that to my editor, and she said, "You are crazy. Why would you, that's so much more work." And I said, "Yeah, it is.
Sounds alive.
It is. It is. And I said, I know I'm making my life more difficult, but that's what these pioneers deserve."
And what's fantastic about that so often Blackness is imagined and rendered and articulated
Through this homogeneous, homogeny.
Yeah. Yes.
And the whole mandate was color, vibrancy, everything is in 3D. We're not flattening anything.
And so that the variations then stay there.
Yes.
Nice.
Yes. I wanted to re-emphasize that everyone, every time you turn the page and read a new story, we're reading a completely new story. But to Tonya's point, that everyone was part of a constellation, that it was a tapestry, and that there are many people in this book, Pioneers, whose actions led to the actions of other people in the book. And you start to kind of see how history crochets and interweaves and produces this larger quilt of actions affecting actions affecting actions.
And it opens the possibility for movement, right? That rather than history as a kind of singular, static vision, but that there's some kind of flexibility, there's variation, and shift that's possible. So, beautiful. So, would you like to read one of...
Really? You don't make me read?
Yes, I am. Yes.
Is there one in particular? No, I don't have mine.
Leah, do Leah.
Leah?
Yeah.
Okay. And it's not to put anyone on the spot, it's really just a part of the process here. How many people know who Leah Chase is? Fantastic, thank you.
Wait, is that for real?
Yes, it's real. No, that's the point. That is the point. Thank you for being honest. Thank you. That is what this is for. Yes.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's why.
Got it.
Use the microphone.
I will. So, Leah Chase. So, food is big in America. And food is, I think, is one of the most complicated. Food
Bigger
is,
in New Orleans.
Hmm?
Bigger in New Orleans.
Yes. Well, food is an industry. Food is an industry, the restaurant business. Food is big business in the United States. And there's a lot of stories about the origin point of why American food is the way that it is. And we're still kind of getting past this. There's some food that's seen as high art, and there's some food that in cultures that's seen as low. And this is one of the many things that we are all struggling with on a daily basis. Like, why is X fine dining? It's code, it's all code. Fine dining, and then finger food, or street food. There are all of these, and we all pass it around like cooties. We all just talk about stuff, and we share these phrases with each other, and no one really litigates what it all means. Like, why is French food fine dining? Why? No one can really explain why. Yet it's an old country with a lot of traditions, but it's also manufactured too. And so, this country's connection to Black food culturally, it all goes back to Africa. And because the Black community was violently cut off from its history, the threads of that are not always evident. Even though we can taste it in the food, there's not a lot of language around it. And so there were a few people in the 1900s that started putting language and recipes and context to the food. And Leah Chase is one of those people. I'm trying to think of who, right now we think about a food doyen, and Martha Stewart is the one who comes to mind. But there were a lot of folks like Edna Lewis and B. Smith and Leah Chase that inspired Martha Stewart. And she'll admit it, but there's a lack of awareness of who these people were that set up our current types of food. So each quote in the book, each story in the book, each subject has a quote that, just to give you context of who these people are in their own words before I start writing and stories about them. And Leah Chase just recently passed away. She was born in 1923 and passed away in 2019. Food builds big bridges. If you can eat with someone, you can learn from them. And when you learn from someone, you can make big changes. We changed the course of America in this restaurant over bowls of gumbo. We can talk to each other and relate to each other when we eat together. It's one of the fundamental things that is universal, no matter what culture or country. There are like some things that every human being does. And it is a really simple thing of how we relate to each other. And human beings are dumb, so we just make it more complicated than it needs to be. But it's really pure. So, even in her 90s, Leah Chase still reported to work at Dookie Chase's restaurant in New Orleans every morning, as she had done for 7 decades. One of 14 children born to Hortensia and Charles Lang. Chase grew up in Madisonville, but moved to New Orleans after high school. There she married bandleader Dookie Chase Jr. and went to work at his family's bar and lunch counter before convincing her in-laws to let her take it over. She transformed the sandwich shop into a full-scale restaurant in 1946. And this premier gathering spot quickly became one of the city's crown jewels of Creole cuisine. Inspired by the fine dining treatment she saw through the windows of whites-only establishments at the peak of the Jim Crow era, Chase wanted to offer Black diners a commensurate level of service and flair. She presented multiple courses on beautiful dinnerware and served up gumbo, crab soup, greens, grilled fish, and cream sauce. Dookie Chase's was soon a hit. I want to read the whole bit. Okay. This restaurant was integral to the community, not just because of the food and ambiance, but because of Chase's political involvement. Rejecting segregation laws that made it illegal to serve white and Black people equally, Chase constantly hosted a mix of dinners and ensured that those supporting the civil rights activism of the day had a place to eat, feeding a range of people from NAACP staff and voter registration volunteers to luminaries such as Martin Luther King Jr. Chase worked to keep the restaurant a safe space for those frontline leaders. They often held secret meetings on the top floor of the restaurant building. A lover of art who recognized that museums and galleries were discriminating against Black artists, Chase not only patronized folks like the famous Black painter Jacob Lawrence, but also displayed their work in the full grandeur that their pieces deserved, making the restaurant not simply a place to dine, but also a place to indulge in the visual storytelling of Black life. She cooked for 3 US presidents, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, among many celebrities over the decades. The Dookie Chase cookbook, published in 1990, is considered a classic of Black Creole cooking. One of the things that this book does not make clear, that I actually didn't realize until halfway, I was halfway through making the book, And after, at that point, almost 30 years in the publishing industry, it had never occurred to me that books don't let you know the scale of the original art. A lot of people assume that every piece in here is the same size. And in addition to each of the pieces being stylistically different, they're all different sizes. There's some that are giant and there's some that are small. This is a giant piece. And what I wanted to show was her just sitting in her kitchen, in her home, and what I just read is who she actually was. And so I didn't want to show her looking stately. I wanted to show her laughing and just enjoying the environment that she created in political times where it was really dangerous for her to be so politically unspoken, and her life could have forfeited, and that she was fearless. I also wanted to show that, and the body language too. Like, she is just inside of her body. She's not performing for anyone. She has an interior world that no one has access to. I wanted to show that.
Thank you. The thing for me, of course, about Leah Chase, I'm from New Orleans. So that sense of people eating together, right? The way that we, as a kid, like the myth that I loved most, this is kind of horrible, actually. It's the myth about Persephone eating a few pomegranate, and so she couldn't leave Hades. I was like, yep, that's what'll happen. You eat with people, and you're bound to them. And that in New Orleans, there really was a sense that, if your food wasn't good, people would pull you and say, oh, honey, you got to do something about those beans. Oh, no. Or they won't eat at your house. So that there's also something she understood about, all these people came because she made the kind of food that warmed them, that spoke to them. Thank
you for asking.
So what, I should open it to questions, yes? Do you have questions for George about this wonderful book?
We have a microphone, so if you have a question, I'm going to come around and give you a mic. I can start off. Do you have a question down here? Yes, coming your way. And
what was the research process like to research every single person that made it to the book?
That's a great question. That's honestly what took the most time, where it wasn't just researching, and it had been a while since I have had to do this much reporting for something, and so the process has really changed. It used to be libraries and institutions, and now it's the internet leading you to libraries and institutions. and the research, the process hasn't really changed, but there was a lot of formality, there's a lot of hidden stuff in here where you can't just use any quote. There are estates that you have to pay. Basically, it's like licensing a song. If you go on Good Morning America and you start singing, all the single ladies, like you have to pay. Like, you're gonna get a bill. You can't just be singing someone else's song just out in the world. And so, I spent a lot of money in the making of this book, paid estates, because I wanted to use a particular quote. And it took a couple of years to research, and we researched for a couple of years before we started writing. And so by the time we started writing, we were deciding on aspects of their life that we wanted to focus on. We were more specific. Okay, we're writing about someone who's well known, like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I love telling the story. Like Aretha Franklin is not in the book because she's a singer. She is in the book because she was one of the savviest business people I have ever read about. I'll tell you a little story about Aretha Franklin. Like, Aretha Franklin is known as really irascible and super salty, and she's that way, and she is that way, because she was used to dealing with people's bullshit all the time. And she grew up frequenting places that were always trying to not pay her what she was worth, or pay her less than they paid white performers. And black performers have been used to this our whole lives. And what she did to combat that is she started demanding that she was paid in cash. And she was paid before she sang, because singers were always denied full payment, especially if you were moving to the South. And because she was so talented, that she demanded payment up front before she opened her mouth. And she did that her entire life. Long after she needed to, she kept doing that. And she was like, I don't trust anyone, because you all lie and you will try. And I'm not gonna deal with that. And so that is why she's in the book. It's not for the reason. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is in the book not because he's a sports figure, but because he's a scholar. And he's a really gifted writer, and has written tons of books that most people here don't know about. He is a fiction writer and a murder mystery writer, and he has written several books on cultural critiques, and that's why he's in this book. So I had my own criteria for what I was, and it wasn't just because, Colin Kaepernick is in the book, not because of what he did on the field. It is what he did off the field. And so what I wanted to show is that, yeah, someone might be famous for all the reasons that we know as black, white people, and everything in between, but people are more interesting than we give them credit for. And our figures sometimes get trapped in amber because they're lost in our public perception of who they are as private citizens. And what I wanted to honor is that all of these people are people. They're not extensions of us. They are their own people.
Beautiful. How did you make the list? And were there people you were just like, oops, sorry?
So I will tell you, I have a list of close to 600 names. I spent a year just doing that. And then I had to decide who was going to be in, and that was really difficult. But it got simpler when I realized that there's not just going to be one book. And I just decided that. Nobody told me that. I decided that there were going to be multiple books, and so that took the pressure off. And I thought I was going to have help. Tanya's laughing because she knows, like, especially, and I've designed a lot of books. This is not the first book I've designed. This is my first book as an author and an artist, but I run a design studio and I design a lot of books, so I'm very much on the inside of this process. And I thought I was going to have help when it came to that. And my editor was just like, nope, it's all you. I said, oh, okay, great, great. And it was all me. There's no intervention or help from anyone else. I decided to take that seriously and commit myself to making that decision. I said, if someone doesn't like my choices, I want them to know that it's me. they have to not like.
How have they responded? Your publishers, your editors, all of it. Like, how are they now?
Well, no, everyone is ecstatic. Everyone is ecstatic. And I have a friend, a mutual friend of ours, that called me a couple weeks ago and he said, you know, I love watching the positive comments that you have received on Amazon. Like, folks are just rapturous about this book. And I said, well, that's news to me because I don't look at Amazon for anything. and I was like, I can't tell you the last time I've been on Amazon. That's not my religion. But he was like, people just keep writing about this. And that was, you know, I'm so on the inside of this process that I'm not really, but one thing that I did not think about when I was making this book that has happened many times since it came out is that a lot of the pioneers have contacted me.
Oh, really?
That's something I did not consider at all. And the very first, it was the week the book came out, the Sun, I will say. There's some people I can't say who they are, just because they were very private conversations. But the son of a pioneer sent me, wrote a long letter about how I had represented his father, and it brought me to tears. Like all of the conversations have brought me to tears because I keep hearing how accurate my personal, it's the personal side that people have responded to. It's the emotional context of how it represented. So one of the pioneers in here, one name I can't tell you, the inventor of Me Too. I spoke to Toronto Burke last week, and it was just, she got the book, found out, and sent me a message on Instagram, and it was still the weirdest way to hear from anyone. I don't know how you kids do it. It's just weird. It's weird.
Come on, you have a really
It's
active,
weird.
beautiful Instagram.
Yeah, but it's still not my primary way of communicating with people. So I'm just like, who's this? You know? And then I realized it was her, and we have a mutual friend, and she got my number, and we spoke. And I have ugly cried so many times because it's not what I was expecting. I've spoken to quite a few people in this book, and I have heard with gratitude that I got their portrayal right. And that's not something that I ever thought I would get this sort of feedback from. And so I think that has been a really surprising aspect of this, where I had a blind spot. I just did not think I would be corresponding with the people, the living pioneers.
I mean, it's a wonderful testament to the way that stories, portrayals can actually move other people, right? Move them closer to us. It's beautiful.
We have a question in the back.
Did anybody get in touch with you because they weren't in the book?
No, thankfully, but I heard, this is a funny aspect of human beings. When I shared the public announcement that I was working on this book, I got different kinds of suggestions. There was a lot of, oh, did you think of X, Y, Z, 1, 2, 3? But there was also, have you heard of my cousin's daughter's father's uncle who is a pioneer? I know. And he did this thing 3 years ago, and I think he should be in your book. I got a lot of that too. And I remember getting into an argument with someone who was annoyed that I didn't have Serena Williams, like their favorite. That I had Althea but not Serena. And my response is, Althea made Serena. And so that's why. And I have very short answers to that. I'm not fighting with anybody. and I could be a moron and say, well, you can make your own book. But that's not how I feel. And I don't feel the need to defend anything that's in the book, you know. There should be 17 versions of this book that it's still all throughout. The one thing I was haunted by, as I was taking this a short point, is I kept thinking that somebody else was gonna do this in the time it took me then. Every year I was like, oh, I'm running out of time. Oh, this should have come out this year. And the book was delayed several times for really ridiculously dramatic reasons. And I just kept thinking, oh, I've missed my window. I've missed my window. It's the one thing I was really down on myself for. I've missed my window. Someone else is going to produce this.
But they were never going to produce that.
Never,
They
and
might produce
since,
some
nothing else has
version.
come out.
Right, but the thing I'm saying is that this is so your vision that it isn't what someone else was produced, even if they did an image text historical thing,
It's true, yes.
right?
Which I was so inside of it, I don't think I ever even thought about that part. But yes.
We're going to have to wrap up soon, but I want to ask Tonya if you have a favorite icon or unknown in the book that just spoke to you. And also, I did ask if you would write, to wrap up tonight, this is sort of a dedication to our evening, if you would read one of your poems. And I'm also very happy that we talked about Leah Chase, because she was the feature, and her restaurant is a feature of the KQED series, cooking series. And if you haven't watched it, please go on KQED and find it. It's amazing. And all of her children and grandchildren are now working and carrying on the traditions of the restaurant, which is an amazing story.
So before Tanya reads, there was a question in the front. I wanted
Question
to
in the
just,
front?
and I can repeat the question.
Oh, okay. For the visuals, how do you land on the depiction that you want to portray of them?
So this is where it gets woo-woo. I communed, and a lot of the pioneers told me how they wanted to be represented. It was a very spiritual experience, and it's something I don't speak about very openly because it's like you gotta read the room, and so not everyone wants to believe that that is real. But the whole making of this process, that was very real. I would often just sometimes know, or I would wake up in the morning with a dream. That happened many times. Like a lot of people visited me in my dreams and told me how they wanted to be represented. And so that was active in the 6 years I worked on this book. And so that was, Dr. Maya Angelou was very active spiritually in the making of this book. And the piece I did of her is also very large. And it was in my studio for about 3 years, that she was just like the patron saint. And every other portrait I made was under her gaze. Like she was staring this way at my studio wall, and all the other pieces were there, and she was just always like, okay, yeah. She had to give it her approval. So yeah, that's the honest answer.
And that's the community, right? That's the community. I'd like to read the Oscar Michaud. And Oscar, well, this will tell you who Oscar Michaud was. 1884 to 1951. My long experience with all classes of humanity had made me somewhat a student of human nature. Just how Oscar Michaud got his start to become the most prolific independent producer of Black films remains unclear. But during a career from 1919 through 1948, Michaud wrote, produced, directed, and distributed more than 40 films, founded his own production company, the Michaud Film Corporation, and was one of only a few Black independent creators to survive the transition from silent films. His 1931 film, The Exile, was the first sound film by a Black person. His final film, The Betrayal, from 1948, was the first Black-produced film to premiere in a white-owned theater. Michaud was born in Metropolis, Illinois, and raised in Great Bend, Kansas. He found work as a Pullman porter, which despite the low wages and the requirement to wait on white travelers hand and foot, allowed him to travel the country at a time when such movement was inaccessible to most Black people. In 1906, he used his earnings, often better paid than Black service workers earned elsewhere, to buy land in South Dakota, where he became a homesteader, writing as he found time. He lost the land to bankruptcy, but he used the experience to enhance his storytelling skills, writing a novel, his third, about homesteading as a Black man. Michaud published The Homesteader in 1917, selling it door to door. To counter the effects of D.W. Griffith's racist film Birth of a Nation, which applauded the terrorism of a white supremacist country, Michaud was inspired to adapt his book himself. It became the first film he directed. In 1919, Hollywood's cultural influence on Michaud's movies is noticeable. He created within similar genres and encouraged the promotion of Black performers as versions of white studio stars. For example, Lorenzo Tucker, with handsome features, tall figure, and fair skin, was known as the Black Valentino. Ethel Moses, a Harlem star and former performer with Cab Calloway's band, was regarded as the Black Jean Harlow. And thanks to his sultry delivery and sensual appeal, B. Freeman was known as the sepia Mae West. Silent movie stars such as Juano Hernandez continued their streak as Michaud's films moved into sound technology, transitioning into talkies right along with their filmmaker. But Michaud also developed his own style of storytelling, one that spoke directly to a specifically Black audience. Actors such as Paul Robeson and Robert Earl Jones got their start in Michaud films, tackling themes that address the Black experience. Michaud's 1931 film, The Exile, based on his 1913 novel, The Conquest, explores an interracial romantic affair. In his 1938 film, God's Stepchildren, he takes on colorism in Black communities. In his 1939 film, Birthright, he follows a young man set on founding a rural school, but who has to deal with pushback from Black and white communities. What's left of the film is in the Library of Congress archives. Some footage, like so many Black independent films from the turn of the century, has been lost to history. In '86, Michaud posthumously won Directors Guild of America Lifetime Achievement Award.
And I'll just add the interconnectedness of this book. Two of the names that Tonya just read, Juano Hernandez, who's the silent film star, and Paul Robeson are also pioneers in the book. And so there's a interconnectivity of some of the people affecting that these two actors and big screen presences all got their start from Oscar Michaud and went on to the greatness that they achieved.
I'm really compelled by Michaud's drive to create a kind of relentlessness and a sense that, okay, I'm gonna find another way to do this. And how do I contend with, how do I answer this vision of Blackness that Griffith perpetuated? he says, okay, I'm gonna answer it in the art that I make. And I'm going to take on, imagine who it is I'm talking with.
Thank you guys very much. Thank you to the brilliant Tonya Foster. And thank you to Laura and team at the Mechanics Institute. Thank you guys for coming out on a school night and being here. And thank you both. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Tonya, did you want to read a short poem for us?
So I'm happy to come back some other time.
Great. All right, we will invite you.